People love each other on Viennese walls. They declare their relationships. They're even proposed in translingual practices, including South Slavic varieties. They express their love for food, most prominently burek.
You're listening to the Transformative Podcast, brought to you by the Research Center for the History of Transformations at the University of Vienna.
Hello and welcome to the newest episode of the Transformative Podcast. My name is Leonid Motz and I'm responsible for PR and social media outreach here at RECET. Today I'm very happy to welcome Katharina Tyran for the episode on Vienna, Austria, the very city RECET is based in. We're going to have a look at its linguistic landscape and how post-Yugoslav migration has shaped it. Katharina is a Slavicist by training. She got her PhD from Humboldt University in Berlin, worked as a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Vienna, and was appointed Associate Professor of Slavic Philology at the University of Helsinki in Finland this year. Katharina's research is focused on South Slavic languages, mostly Bosnian, Croatian, Montenegrin, Serbian, and Burgenland Croatian. She works on writing systems and orthography and sociolinguistic topics such as linguistic landscape research, languages and identity, and the commodification of language. I'm thrilled to have you with us, Katharina.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
So, to get started, who are the speakers of South Slavic languages? What languages do and did they speak, and how do they get to Vienna?
This is a super complex question. I will try to answer it briefly. In Vienna, we actually have people speaking all kinds of South Slavic languages and varieties. To start with a rather easy way of counting, Slovene, Bosnian, Croatian, Montenegrin, Serbian, Macedonian, Bulgarian. We also have speakers of South Slavic minority languages, such as Burgenland Croatian, which is a recognized minority language in Austria. And we even have speakers of Molise Croatian in Vienna. It might be only a handful, but I know that they are out there in Vienna speaking also Molise Croatian. So we can say that on the one hand side, we have for sure Bosnian, Croatian, Montenegrin, Serbian, which is the dominant South Slavic languages in Vienna with all its variations. And this is something that's important to add, that we find a lot of different varieties of this, what we call languages, different dialects, different sociolects. So you will possibly hear dialects from Dalmatia as much as from southern Serbia, so people do not necessarily always identify themselves only with kind of this very easy way of counting a language. And these people came to Vienna and Austria at different times and for different reasons. Maybe we could try to generally speak of three waves for the second half of the 20th century that is important for recent times. So we had the Gastarbeiter migration in the 1960s and 70s. We then had the refugee migration during the Yugoslav wars in the 1990s, and we have recently a very strong brain drain migration from all over Southeastern Europe to Vienna. Who are they? Most possibly multilingual people living all over Vienna, and as such, I would say that they are an integral part of the Viennese society for decades.
Let's talk numbers. How many inhabitants of Vienna speak South Slavic languages, and how difficult is it to get reliable statistics on them? Do you even have an educated guess on these numbers?
Numbers always depend on who is asking what, at what time, and in what context. So in Austria, we had until 2001 a census where people had to self-identify in terms of what has then been called Umgangssprache, so that might be colloquial language or everyday language. We don't have such a census anymore ever since 2001, so people don't tick themselves into a linguistic box. We have official numbers by the city of Vienna that are annually published in the so-called Integrationsmonitor. And we see that, well, in the last 5 to 10 years, people with a background in Serbia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Croatia regularly range among the top 10 in Viennese population. Other South Slavic communities are maybe not that prominently ranked, but still they are part of Vienna and they are there. But such statistics often draw either on country of origin, so where someone is born or where someone's parents are born, or citizenship. To me, as kind of also a sociolinguist, it's important that this does not automatically imply that we can conclude on language. So if someone is born in Serbia or has Serbian citizenship, this does not necessarily imply that he or she is using Serbian as a first language. It can be Romani or Hungarian, for instance. But, well, at least people with this origin rank regularly among top 10. And we have the number that 12% of Viennese school students indicated Bosnian, Croatian, Serbian as their first language. So this is also quite a lot. So I remember 10 or 15 years ago even, there was a claim by Der Standard who said that every 10th Viennese has South Slavic origin. But so if we take a rather maybe holistic approach to all sorts of numbers, we can for sure conclude that people speaking different South Slavic languages and varieties are prominently present in Vienna.
This obviously means we are speaking about several thousand people, a very big community.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
So these people interact in some meaningful way with the city, with its landscape, with the linguistic signs you see in its landscape. So what constitutes a linguistic landscape, and what are places and contexts you centered when looking for post-Yugoslavs among other migrant groups in Vienna? And how do you even collect that kind of data?
Linguistic landscape is also, again, in a nutshell, we could say it's the language in the public space. Very early approaches strongly focused on road signs, advertising billboards, street names, place names, commercial shop signs, public signs on government buildings. So this was kind of the very first approach to what forms a linguistic landscape of a given territory or region or place. But this understanding has significantly expanded. So today we had the latest edited collection on linguistic landscape studies that was, I think, 7 centimeters thick. There is a lot going on in this field. Researchers started including graffiti and stickers, the Stolpersteine, for instance. We have the World Wide Web that is kind of constitutes also a linguistic landscape. We can also include moving objects such as cars, for instance. What do people stick on their cars? Even our body in terms of skinscapes, what do people tattoo? So all this could be approached as a linguistic landscape. The idea is not to ask only what we can see, but also what are the motives behind that? What are ideologies we can read out of it? How can we see dynamics in the society? How can we see which topics are contested? And also what's important for me as someone also researching minority languages, what languages are invisible and are not there, we could actually expect. So these are topics in linguistic landscape research. And concretely on Vienna, so what I did is I did research with a group of students. It was a research-driven seminar I had at the University of Vienna back in 2019, so it's 5 years ago. Our idea was to document the visibility of South Slavic languages in 3 neighborhoods in Vienna. We first concentrated on a rather trapezoid neighborhood between Otterkringer Straße, Festgasse, Talierstraße, and the Gürtel. So this is the 16th and the 17th district, including, of course, Otterkringer Straße, that is prominently called Balkanstraße in Vienna. So if you are in that area, everybody will know that Otterkringer Straße has this name of Balkanstraße. So we have a lot of cafes, clubs, takeaways, also with a South Slavic background. Then we had as a second area of interest the streets around Äußeren Rilferstraße up to Schmelzbrücke, Schweglerstraße, Merzstraße, that have quite a similar structure in terms of South Slavic entrepreneurs as Otterkringer Straße. And our third area of interest was the bus terminal in Erdberg, as this is a contact zone, as a mobility hub where Viennese residents with a South Slavic background regularly use in terms of traveling, for instance, in between the countries of origin. And what we did additionally, that the students and myself, so during the whole semester, we documented signs that matched our framework throughout the semester wherever we saw it. So altogether, we collected about 500 pictures. So the idea was to really take a photo of each linguistic sign individually. And we did this with an app. It's called Linkscape, that has been developed by Christoph Burschke as an app combining citizen science approach and linguistic landscape research. And we had a separate project within this, and our data is publicly available. So everyone can see our pictures, everyone can see the tags. We have the short name Wien, so you can actually also filter our data. Our approach was to document every language sign within a definable frame. And we kind of had 2 modifications to that. We had the limitation that it had to contain a South Slavic language. We extended it in terms of that it was not necessarily a word we had to see, but for instance, also just one grapheme that has a concrete message in the South Slavic context.
So one grapheme would be, for instance, a letter or
Exactly.
part of a letter.
Exactly, yes.
And what do we learn about power relations from these linguistic signs? Who shapes the linguistic landscape of Vienna, and for whom is it shaped?
Well, in the context of South Slavic languages, we can definitely state that it's bottom-up. The linguistic signs we found have been above 95% bottom-up signs. So my conclusion is that people actually claim visibility themselves by their practices, by using the languages. Top-down signs, so coming from above, coming from state authorities, have been almost completely absent. But what we found, and what we really did not expect, we found a lot of subcultural practices. More than 50% of our documented materials have been subcultural and practices such as stickers and graffiti. So this really kind of impressed us. It was subversive language act, so to say. This surprised us a lot. And I concluded out of this that really such practices are a reaction to power structures. They are a reaction to language hierarchies in the Viennese and also more general the Austrian society, where Slavic languages are for sure not ranked as valuable or important as other languages, and corresponding communities kind of felt rather invisible and marginalized for a long time. And what they do now is they bring their languages in the public space, and they are not invisible anymore because they help themselves to visibility.
Language and cultural identity often go hand in hand, and what kind of cultural resources are brought to the fore in these signs you collected?
Well, cultural resources is also a rather broad term. I would try to break it down. So we found, in combination with words and with graphemes, very easily and prominently flags, for instance, or maps, or border lines. Elements of different coats of arms have been there in different contexts. What we also found in the material is that color codes are actually very important, specifically in the context of football. So we have the division of Red Star and Partizan in Belgrade that is dominantly visible also in the color coding of red and black kind of being in a conflict at some point. We have Dinamo Zagreb that has a very specific shade of blue that is highly visible in the Viennese linguistic landscape, and there are messages written that would not necessarily be connected to football, for instance, but if you know that this color code is the color code of Dinamo Zagreb, you can see it in the broader context. We also saw that we have iconic figures or iconic pictures that are used. There is one of Stjepan Filipovic, who was a commander of a partisan detachment, who was hanged in June 1942, and there is this iconic picture how he's reaching up both his hands, and this we found on stickers, for instance. We found also from the opposite political angle Ratko Mladic, or even not him, but only his cap, that also became kind of an iconic item that is recognized. So we find cultural and historic legacies from different times and different contexts in Southeastern Europe, but also, and this is very important, we also find semiotic codes and resources from Vienna and from Austria. And what was specifically interesting for me is that they communicate and they possibly merge at some points. And this is what I find particularly interesting. So kind of these cultural codes from a Viennese context and from a South Slavic context or from an Austrian context, at one point you might find them on a sticker where you can find it all on a really small space.
Is there a migrant connection between post-Yugoslavs and other groups in Vienna's linguistic landscape? So do we see friction and conflict, for instance, between different groups of migrants?
We see a lot of frictions and conflicts, not necessarily of South Slavic groups against others. We can observe a lot of, several levels, very stereotyped. There are, of course, conflicts of nationalisms, very prominently Serbian and Croatian nationalisms on a bilateral level that we can find on a lot of spots in Vienna, very prominently with the U from the Ustasha movement and the tetragrammic Serbic cross that are in a dialogue, so to say, or in a conflictive dialogue. We can also find polyphone encounters of nationalist hate speech, for instance, combining Albanian, Croatian, and Serbian nationalism. And so we can see different alliances, for instance, Albanian, Croatian nationalisms against Serbian nationalism as the common foe, so to say. We can find ideological frictions, such as nationalism, fascism against anti-fascism, or rather it's anti-fascism against nationalism and fascism. The Antifa is very prominent in this. So in most of the nationalistic signs we documented, no matter from what side nationalistic, we can see that Antifa uses its abbreviation, AFA abbreviation, either drawing over or pasting over. So it's almost every time there is a reaction by its rather leftist circles to nationalist claims with a South Slavic background in Vienna. We can find communist semiotic codes and slogans as reactions to nationalism. So one of my most beloved examples is from Aussichtsweg in the 19th district, so rather a posh district. You would not expect it there. But we documented as a first layer the Serbian cross that is sprayed on an eye level, so you see it when you walk by, above amplified by the country code or abbreviation for Serbia, Srb, Serb. And this kind of exposition of Serbian nationalism triggered a reaction of Croatian nationalism. So this Serbian cross was overwritten and crossed by the Ustaša U. And then the message Bog I Hrvati, so God and the Croats, which is a saying that is attributed to Ante Starčević, who was one of the very prominent figures of 19th century Croatian nationalism. And this Bog I Hrvati is in this Dinamo Zagreb blue. So we see kind of this connection to football, because if we go up Aussichtsweg, we actually come to the stadium of the Viennese Football Club Vienna. As a reaction to these two nationalisms in contact, we find that the E of Bog I Hrvati, so the last grapheme, this E is kind of literally dotted with the communist sign of hammer and sickle symbol. So this is kind of the universal symbol of communism, Marxism, socialism, that was also an emblem of the League of Communists of Yugoslavia. And we can find battles over territory of different fan associations, transposing local rivalry to Vienna. So I already mentioned Belgrade, Partizan and Red Star you will find in Vienna too, fighting for visibility. Sometimes also in association with a local Viennese rivalry. So Austria Wien and Rapid Wien kind of in supporting either one of the Belgrade football clubs. We find also conflicts of individuals. For instance, very prominently a sticker that we documented several times by the rapper Kid Pax with the slogan Ajde, ajde, ruf ti Muria, which is combining colloquial languages, South Slavic and Viennese, as a reaction to beef he had with Andreas Gabalier. So this is kind of this individual level where we found conflicts. I would definitely like to add that we find different levels and layers of conflict in Vienna, but there is also a lot of love. So it's not only hate we see on the walls. People love each other on Viennese walls too. They declare their relationships. They're even proposed in translingual practices, including South Slavic varieties. They express their love for food, most prominently burek. So it's not only kind of this very stereotypical approach that people from the Balkans all hate each other. No, they also love each other on Viennese walls.
Thank you, Katharina. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.